And we are rolling on May 29th? Wow, 29, 2018. Where it's a beautiful day in Los Angeles. The sunshine is shining. We feel bad for those people on the East Coast that are experiencing bad weather. UCLA is beautifully landscaped. We're very lucky to be there. So why don't we call this House to order and debate the following factual question. Scientists using computer models can accurately predict future climate events. I repeat, scientists using computer models can accurately predict future climate events. Speaking for the government will be the leader of the government, Arun, sometimes called Varun, but that's just a term of endearment.
Let's just legally adopt that name at this point.
Well, we miss Varun, so we had to adopt you.
There was an actual previous Varun? Is that?
There was.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just, okay, gotcha. Is it okay if I have a brief off-time roadmap?
It's on your time, baby, so you have 7 minutes till you can do jumping jacks if you want.
Okay, I'm choosing my phone at time. Give me a second. All right. Whenever you look up at me, I'll start.
I'll be ready.
Okay. All right, so just a quick, brief roadmap, I guess on-time roadmap. I'll be going over the framework of today's debate, the resolution, as Mr. Miller already announced what it was. I'll be going over 2 salient definitions, which are critical, because they are very ambiguous in today's round. So it'll be to the ease of you guys in order to get these definitions established, so the debate can move forward clearly and smoothly. So the first definition, as cited, for scientists, that's a pretty well-known, common definition we can all take for granted. But one of the more interesting definitions is computer models, and it's as cited by climatica.org, and it cites that in climate science, computer models serve to substitute reality for a range of scenarios. The surface of the planet needs to be divided up into boxes to accurately represent every part of the planet. The inputted data is represented by mathematical equations based on process-based physical laws. And the next important definition is accurately, and this is critical in today's debate because accurately is a very ambiguous term. So accurately, according to sciencecouncil.org, is the sufficiently enough information to inform or to impact public policy. So in today's round, our definition of accuracy is its ability to affect public policy in some sort of positive way. If it is able to affect public policy in some sort of positive way, these computer models, then that is considered accurate. Obviously, there's always scientific uncertainty in science. You cannot be 100% certain that there will be a scientific event occurring. Thus, it is unreasonable definition to say accurately translates to 100% certainty. Thus, it's more likely. And then that moves on to the criterion of today's debate. And because this is a fact debate, the criteria is very clear-cut and it's very simple. It's simply the preponderance of evidence. And to break this down, because it is kind of a big jumbo-mumbo word, preponderance, it simply means more likely than not. Meaning if this fact is more likely than not, we win the debate. If this fact is not more likely than not, they win that debate. They win the debate. So the criteria will be based on the preponderance of the evidence, more likely or not, based on that evidence, which is the fact more likely or not. You can think of it like a balancing point. If just one feather tips it over, then we win the debate. But if one feather tips over that balancing point to their side, they win that debate. Now moving on to my arguments, and then before or after we go on to our arguments, if time allows, I'll try to preempt some of their contentions that they'll bring up in their second speech. So on to contention one. The spectrum of models available for predictive analysis does not preclude simpler and more accurate predictions. So as of recently, as cited by NASA, most computerized kind of models that predict the future of climatic events are based on the IPCC model, which is essentially a broad-based computer algorithmic model which takes into account many variables, many assumptions, and many complex facts because it tries to generate the most amount of output of information. But because you need to take in so many assumptions and because you need to take in so many variables, it complexes all that information and the accuracy can be sometimes in question. So we do concede that certain computer models, such as the predominantly IPCC models, have some questions to their veracity and to their validity. There are simpler models that are available, and that comes in from a study by Keston Green, Scott Armstrong, and Willie Soon of the International Journal of Forecasting, who claim that using the more simpler models which are available, which take in a less input of information and extract a less output of information, actually produce 1/7 of the errors produced by the IPCC models, which are predominantly used. So we see that in our world, we can simply just use the simpler models that are available. They may talk about the IPCC predominant models, but if we just simply transition over to the more simpler models that take in less factors, less assumptions, then we can in fact accurately predict climatic events. And that moves on to sort of the theory. Now we've kind of understood how it works, but the theory is pretty logically sound. When you have more assumptions, the accuracy or the results or the conclusions won't be as verified, because when you make so many assumptions, it's all it is. It's assumptions. It's not facts. It's not a factual premise. It's an assumption. So moving on to my second argument, the extent of technological development relevant to climate change predictive technology is a testament to the veracity of its technology. So just in the past 20 to 30 years, the technological industry specific to climate change predictions with computer models has revolutionized compared to any other industry in the world in that short amount of time. The fact that it's expanded in such a great amount of time, such a short period amount of time, is a testament to the veracity and to the success of these specific technologies and specific computer models. Sure, there is work to be done, but the fact that there has been so much growth in such a little amount of time is a testament to the fact that they are in fact accurate and are in fact successful. Now that moves on to my third argument. Now accuracy of prediction doesn't entail 100% scientific conclusiveness. As I already stated before, it doesn't necessarily mean that accuracy translates to 100% scientific certainty, because obviously the scientific certainty is never 100%. So it would be an unfair abuse of their definition to say that accurate means 100% certainty. They will bring up empirical studies of certain models failing, but in fact, it can't be with 100% certainty. There is on our side for the affirmative, we do have room for error. Now this goes on to possible refutations, and can I get a time check? Whoever's timing.
6:35.
Oh, 6:35. Okay.
You have 25 seconds left.
Okay. I'll just go on one possible refutation. So people try to conflate that. Because people can't even predict the climate in 2 days from now, or the weather in 2 days from now, how will they be able to predict the climate in 10 years from now? But one refutation from that, as stated by NASA once again, is that climate and weather are two very different things. They may bring up that thing, but climate is based upon trends and based upon trajectory, whereas weather is very, very volatile and very variable instance, and trends and trajectories are much more predictable versus random volatile events. Thank you. I now stand open for points of clarification, points of questions and clarification.
Thank you very much, Arun. Okay.
So, using your definition that something is accurate when it positively impacts public policy.
That was one prong of the definition, yes.
But
correct.
public policy has been impacted by false information in the past. For example, the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003 based on the assumptions that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Is this really a fair definition of accurate at this point?
Well, this is our definition of accurate within the context of the proposition, yes. Not the context of the proposition of whatever comparison you made.
So you talk about how simpler models are used. Do simpler models accurately represent the climate? Because it does feel like you're cherry-picking information at this point.
No, I mean, once again, I can reiterate what I already said in my speech, given I was speaking a bit fast, but a study by Kirsten Green, Scott Armstrong, and Willie Soon reported that a more simple model used in the IPCC to make climate forecast errors produced by two of their forecasts were a seventh of the errors and produced the same amount of information.
But isn't there a wrongdoing in making sure that the process that gets that information out there is correct? Don't we want the inputs to be as accurate as the outputs?
Right, that's why we want less assumptions. Assumptions make
But
faulty.
we're creating models that doesn't accurately reflect climate, because we're not concerning with all the processes.
I'm kind of confused with your question, but simply taking a simpler model equals less assumptions. Less assumptions means more accuracy. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Chair will now recognize the leader of the opposition to oppose the proposition that scientists using computer models can accurately predict future climate events. You have 7 minutes to refute this case.
Good afternoon. I would like to reinstate the topic of today's debate. Scientists using computer models are able to accurately predict future climate events. We agree with the government that the criteria is the preponderance of evidence. We do not, however, agree with their definition of accurate. Merriam-Webster defines accurate as free from error, especially as the result of care. We do agree that this is a bit tough on everyone, so we can agree to the definition of within a reasonable margin of error. This is a very important debate. We do not deny global warming. Global warming is seen as an observable trend over the past decades. However, these models are important in predicting the future, how change is going to look like. And these models are not, in fact, accurate. Therefore, we hold the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the accuracy of these models. If they cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these models are, in fact, accurate, they will not win this debate. The contentions me and my partner will present to you today are that there is a severe lack in knowledge, that models are based on assumptions, that models are inaccurate even on a smaller geographic level, and even at today's technological pace, we do not know when models will in fact be accurate. I will now go on to the first argument, the severe lack of knowledge. Earth's climate is one of the most complex processes out there. We all know the sheer size of the Earth, we all know the amount of people on Earth, and we can therefore make the very logical assumption that climate is complex. In an article published by Columbia University earlier this year, they describe the process scientists go through when they create their models. When creating climate models, scientists use one of three common types of simple climate models. These models use numbers to simplify the complexities that exist. Why do we need to simplify? We need to simplify because we do not know how things work. Not because we can't process them, but because we do not know how they work. This affects the confidence of the output of these models. If we don't know how things work, how can we then be sure that what the model says is true actually is true? More so, when we judge the accuracy of models, we're not judging them on forecasts. Instead, the same article states that models are evaluated on hindcasting. That means that they're supposed to predict the past. How accurate are the model's predictions with the past? Does this seem logical to you? For me, it seems like calling someone smart because they can score high on an exam where they already have the questions and answers. They already knew what happened. The models already knew what the variables were. They just need to put them in there. More so, how do we know that the future will behave like the past? And this brings on argument 2, that models are based on assumptions. It's absolutely true that assumptions are necessary in models because climate is complex. But when you make assumptions, you face 2 possible errors. Either things didn't happen that you expected would happen, or things happened that you expected wouldn't happen. And that's just eliminating the entire continuum everything is on, where a variable can be higher or lower than you expected. This point is made by Dr. Gavin Schmidt at NASA in an article for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. I quote, "The assumed changes in forcings in the future may not transpire. For instances, concentration of carbon dioxide are predominantly a function of economics, technology, and population growth, and are much harder to predict than climate more than a few years out. Economics, technology, and population growth. One could argue that these are driven more by politics than by climate. So in a sense, we're using models to predict climate when one of the very most important effects on climate are caused by something completely different. These models do not include political projections, and when they do, they typically work in a straight line. According to an article in Nature, models do make these assumptions, for example, how quickly we'll switch to green energy, but they fail to realize that Earth does not move in a straight line. These articles do not assume that we will face great recessions like we did in 2008, nor do they predict any similar things. So the assumptions would seem like it would be useful if they were at least were scientifically grounded. But in an article posted in the journal Thermal Science in 2015, this is not the case. Assumptions are what we want them to be. This means they are not always scientifically sound. If you want to emphasize a specific gas, for example, carbon dioxide, if you want to lower the importance of something else, you can do that. And who is going to question you? This is not a transparent process. Argument 3, models are inaccurate even on a smaller geographic area. The uncertainties we see in models play even a larger role the smaller the area is. For example, volcanic ashes. If they have an impact on the global level, imagine the impact they have on predictions over Iceland. And number 4, even at the technological pace, we don't know when models will be accurate. We are aware that mankind is getting smarter, and that is a good thing. But what did that result in for us? The models are getting more accurate in the sense that they simulate many processes more realistically, according to Reto Knuti, a professor at the Institute for Atmospheric and Climate Science in Zurich, who was one of the lead writers on the IPC. But having said that, and I'm still quoting him, all of that has not really helped in decreasing the uncertainty in future projections. We know how the processes work out. We're still very, very uncertain. And this article talked about the known unknowns. Dr. Gavin Schmidt at NASA even claims that there are unknown unknowns, things that we have no idea what role they play at all. And NASA has also criticized their own models, claiming that the margin of errors need to be better. And where models were compared in 2017 by Carbon Brief, no model came close to performing within the margin of error suggested by NASA. More so, how do you fit naturally occurring events like El Nino and La Nina into these predictions? Well, what NASA does is they remove them post-fact. This leaves room for tampering to adjust other things to make the model seem more accurate. I now stand open for questions and further points of clarification.
Thank you very much. Please come to the front of the podium and stand close together and pretend you like each other.
Oh, we do like each other. There's no pretend.
All right, so I heard something pretty interesting during your speech, so I decided to write it down. So you said, and I quote, climate models have proven to be successful, have proven to be not successful.
I did not say that.
In the very beginning of your speech, you have said current computer models have been proven to be unsuccessful.
I did not say that.
Okay, well, let's just, okay, moving on. Okay. Climate models.
I
you
said climate models are important to see where we're going.
Okay, right, but how can we say that they're unproven or unaccurate or inaccurate when the current technology that has just been developed in the past 10 years hasn't had the chance to actually been implemented on a large-scale experimental basis?
Well, we're talking about that models are based on hindcasting and not forecasting. And as long as they're based on hindcasting, we can't be sure about their accuracy. Therefore, they're inaccurate.
Hindcasting and forecasting are very different things. You take into account different variables, don't you?
You do?
Right. So then, so if we have the new technology just developed in the past 10 to 20 years, which hasn't been tested, how can you say that these are not accurate models?
How can you say that they're accurate?
Based upon empirical evidence and
But they haven't been tested.
Right. But you can link. Okay. Well, one example is you can talk about the pre-predictions of current accurate predictions of the glacial ice caps melting, and many of the same IPCC factors that are used to predict those are being currently used to predict these.
By accurate, they're within a margin of error, and that margin of error is claimed by NASA is way too large. Everything is accurate according in that margin of error. It's too
The
wide.
margin of error for the glacier approximation melting was not was outside of the margin of error, you're saying?
No, I'm saying the margin of error is so wide that essentially everything falls into it.
Okay, so then what is your definition of approximation of error? What's your percentage?
We're claiming that the margins of error are too wide.
Right, so under your definition, what is a reasonable degree of error?
Well, Dr. Gavin Smith at NASA claimed that within reason would be within 0.5%.
Within 0.5%?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that cross-examination. And we will now hear from the visitor from the east, known as Haley, who comes to us from Johns Hopkins University. Yes, sirree. She loved it. She wanted to stay there, yeah. Give me a moment here, you're a different size.
Today we are debating whether or not we can use computer models to accurately predict future events. Now, I think there's been a large mischaracterization today about what exactly goes into these climate models and how accurate they are. And so I'm going to explain this to you guys. So we want to know, in terms of accurately, we agree that within a reasonable margin of error is an acceptable definition, but moreover, we think that our definition is important because the ultimate goal of this debate is, should we trust these models enough to impact public policy in a positive way? So I first of all want to set the record straight with models have proven to be accurate. An example of a model, just to give you guys a frame of reference, is so the prediction that the climate would increase, the warming would increase, was accurately predicted by a NASA observation, and that was in the 80s, and that proved to be completely accurate and true. And then after that, there was another study that then took into account anthropogenic factors, and that created a direct causality between humans, the Industrial Revolution, and increased global warming. So hindcasting is really important, and I think it's a mischaracterization that the opposition came in by saying that hindcasting is like taking a test and knowing the answers. In actuality, what hindcasting actually does is it takes data, it takes existing data, what we know, and it tests the models. So the models still have to project what have to show what happened in the past. So it's more like taking a test, not seeing the answers, and then after you're done taking the test, comparing them to see what you got right and what you got wrong. And hindcasting tests these models, and when hindcasting does, these models prove to be accurate. And why this is important is it shows that we have a greater understanding of how things like how physical laws work, and it's not based on assumptions. Okay, so another contention that I want to bring up in addition to Arun, just to keep going on with how these models are tested with hindcasting, according to a data overview from Berkeley Earth last updated 2018, the most accurate models are from NASA, Berkeley Earth, and the NOAA. So if the opposition brings up anything from the IPCC, those are not the most accurate models, and in this debate we just need to prove to you guys that the most accurate models are the most state-of-the-art models from NASA, Berkeley Earth. Those ones can be trusted. Okay, so our second contention is that we can use multiple models in order to ensure this accuracy. So the idea here is that we can take the Berkeley Earth model, the NASA model, and the NOAA model, compare them and average the results, and if they have similar results, it is we can predict if they are accurate, and we can be confident in those results because multiple models predicted the same outcome. Because different models take into different data. According to the Journal of Climate Research published in 2010, the use of multiple models allows assessment of the range of uncertainty and impacts of climate change, because the thing is, like, if you take multiple models into account, then you have a pretty good idea that it will be accurate. So also, model technology itself has advanced significantly even within the past few years. According to the National Association and Atmospheric Administration, in February 2018, which was extremely recently, grid size of models has been increased. The ability to store data has increased, and in addition to that, the speed at which these models act at has increased as well. So overall, the fact that this technology has improved so significantly holds up against their claims that it's just not. And they didn't really provide much data showing that it's not and it hasn't advanced, and that these advancements have not helped.
90 seconds.
Is it 7 minutes or 5?
90
seconds left.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said 5, okay. And then also, advances in science make better models. So the opposition is trying to tell you, they literally made a claim that the world is so large and there's so many things in this world we don't understand, but that's just not true. If you've ever taken a geography class, you can know that we do have understandings of ocean currents, of wind patterns. We understand to a great degree how El Niños work, and we know that they occur every 5 years. Recently, according to the Nature Research Journal in May 2018, we now understand how clouds work, because we know what governs them in thermodynamic conditions and precipitation, which is honestly way too hard to explain. But we understand clouds. We also now, according to the Journal of Atmospheric Sciences by Berkeley Earth, we can now determine the exact explicit and analytical expression for the LCL, which has a major effect on temperature and climate. the main points that we want you to take away from this is that we do have an understanding of basic laws and basic laws and physics, and that is what goes into these data sets. We also take into account observations from things like ice cores and from past experiences. Climate is different from temperature in the way that climate is not nearly as chaotic, and it can be predicted because there are trends. We can look at the past and we can assess those to understand and predict trends to a reasonable degree. Also, what's really important to take into consideration is that if all three of the most accurate models predict that there is warming, it is not important necessarily that we know to the exact degree how much warming. What's more significant and more impactful is that there's a consensus that there is warming so that we can take take actions in public policy in order to mitigate this warming. And also, I included a graph. It's hard to show you, but the margin of error for these three top models is less than, they're all within 0.5 of a degree. So in that sense, they are extremely accurate and they can be trusted.
Thank you very much. It's now time to hear from the member of the opposition for a cross-examination of his erstwhile opponent, who will come to the front of the podium and stand close together and fend affection.
When can you start? Okay. Quick question. In your last 20 seconds in the speech, you said that it's not important to what degree climate change happens, but the fact that there is warming. Don't you think that it's important to know to what degree it happens? Because there's a huge difference when saying a 1 degree change is different than a 2 degree change, and that can affect policy.
So what I'm saying is that if it's within that margin of error of like 1 degree or 2 degrees, then that's not what is as important, and that these top climate models have literally the same margin of error of 0.5 degrees. So these are extremely accurate.
Right. So even these 3 different models that you suggested, these different models have different assumptions that are made from. So do you really think that aggregating them is really doing like an apple to apples comparison? Don't you think it's more of like an apple to oranges, given the fact that different scientists have different assumptions that they put into these models?
No. So the multi-model approach is accurate because they take into consideration different factors and different data sets, and that's what makes them more accurate. Also, considering that they all basically have the same outcomes, that's proving that they can be trusted.
Right, but having a more general level of understanding of what the outcome is not the same thing as having like an accurate level of what the outcome would be, because that, at the end of the day, even on a definition, is something that drives policy.
Again, it's within the margin of error of 0.5 degrees. So again, they are extremely accurate, and what we're saying is they're accurate enough to impact policy.
Right. Then the last question is, you said that technological advancements would make it more likely, but not certainly to predict future events. So don't you believe that even at that point, there's a varying degree of uncertainty within that prediction, and that uncertainty can be large, as Ricard stated, that it's not within NASA's range of what's accurate?
Okay, so Ricard, what he brought up from NASA, they're saying that they always want to be better, and that they want a smaller margin of error than what they already have, which we're saying is sufficient enough within the context of the definition.
Thank you very much. The chair will now hear the member of the opposition for his 7-minute speech of opposition to the proposition that science using computer models can accurately predict future climate events. Take it away, Pratik.
Sure. 2 things I'm going to do in this debate. First, go over my partner's contention of the 4 arguments that we brought up, which is first, there's significant lack of knowledge amongst the scientists. Second, being that the models are created and based on multiple assumptions. third, that models are inaccurate even on smaller geographic area, and fourth, that even at the pace of technological progress, we can compensate that out. And the second thing I'm going to do is on the comparative way, on the way the debate based on the criterion and the definitions that's been set, and tell you why we on side opposition necessarily take this debate. And third, if time really permits me to have that, go over a couple of refutations. But at the end of the day, who can predict what happens in time? So going over the first thing of backing up my partner's case, why do we say that there is significant lack of knowledge among scientists, right? Because scientists really do not fully comprehend the natural climatic process or even the weather patterns that are taking place within the systems, right? We say that scientists have yet to fully comprehend these systems because these systems interact with each other much more differently, as opposed to just having a simple model of say what cloud patterns can be, of what the different temperature differentials are during El Nino or La Nina. So what is the evidence regarding that? We say that based on a study that's been conducted by NIPCC, which is the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change, it was determined that to have any sort of validity in terms of future projections, the GCMs, which are the general circulation models, must incorporate not only many physical processes involved in determining climate, but also important chemical and biological processes that influence climate over long periods of time. Several of these processes are either missing or inadequately represented in even today's state-of-the-art climate models. So given the fact that even the NIPCC has stated that these state-of-the-art climate models, which they claim are so accurate, just do not have any sort of foundational understanding of what these climatic or these these processes are, we say that at that point the impact of this is that the lack of knowledge regarding current climatic processes will yield inadequate predictions about the future. As a result, these models cannot be trusted to make any sort of accurate predictions about the future. So what happens as a result of this is that even if we say that there is a general trend of what's going to happen within the climate, insofar as this debate is taking place about the accuracy of these models, we say that these models are not necessarily accurate in determining whether or not certain climatic event might take place within the future. And that's not also stating that it's going to be a 1 degree rise or a 2 degree rise, because we think that the difference at this point is incredibly important given the fact that public policy and all governments is really determined on these sort of climatic models. Second point of contention, that models are created and based on multiple assumptions. They concede to the fact that these models are in a way based on certain assumptions that are made. Within my cross-ex, I noted the point that these assumptions that are made are different from model to different model. As a result, we see that these models cannot necessarily be compared with each other given the fact that there are different assumptions that take place. While necessarily the outcome might be sometimes the same, we say that the processes that go behind these models are important in and of themselves because that's what determines on how to conduct the overall scientific process. So what is the evidence based on the fact that that because of this, because of the fact that certain models are made of certain assumptions, that they do not create a comprehensive overview of what these natural processes would look like. Within nature, we do not see that there being any sort of assumptions being created. We cannot hold certain variables constant, whereas allow other variables to fluctuate in any way. So what is the evidence for stating that these assumptions are actually harmful? Based on the article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, we say that it purports that climate models are amalgams of fundamental physics, of approximations to well-known equations, and empirical estimates known as parameterizations of processes that either can't be resolved or that are only poorly constrained based on the data that's been provided. Likewise, even within, further support that, the evidence from NASA based on a press report that was revealed, it said that the long-term warnings, that there are uncertainties involved, not only the mathematical model, but also within climates. For instance, the climatic patterns such as El Nino, La Nina, cannot be necessarily factored into these climate models. We know for in some cases when these climatic events might take place, but we don't necessarily know how they exactly might play out. Given the fact that there's these uncertainties involved, we say that at that point these models cannot necessarily be trusted. Third argument, why models are inaccurate even on a smaller geographic scale. The models that are utilized by scientists are largely utilized on larger scale to predict climatic events across the globe. But sometimes even these assumptions that are used are also used within the state-of-the-art models that are used within to predict, say, on a smaller geographic scale of weather patterns, or for that matter, what will happen within a certain grid size of a geographical location. So what is the evidence for this? Again, based on a study conducted by the NIPCC, we see that there are limitations in computing power frequently, which result in the ability of models to resolve important climatic processes. What that happens is that low resolution models fail to capture many important phenomena of regional and lesser scales, such as clouds, which means that downscaling to higher resolution models introduces boundaries of interaction that can contaminate the modeling area and propagate error. To the point where we say that there is a significant level of error that can take place, these models do not necessarily accurately predict what might happen. Again, furthering the evidence from this is that we see that the outputs from the circulation models are often then used to drive detailed regional climate models to predict local environmental variations. To the point where even at the lower level, or even at the small geographical level, that these models cannot accurately predict certain events, we say that these models are not accurate in and of themselves. So what is the impact of this? These models that are utilized to predict events on a smaller scale are not even reliable. Therefore, we cannot say with certainty that the models will be applicable even on the larger scale to predict some sort of climatic patterns. Moving on to the fourth point, even at the pace of technological progress, we cannot compensate for the fact that there's going to be a growing level of uncertainty. There's a very interesting evidence in order to prove why even at the pace of technological progress as they purport, that even at that point we can't say with certainty that these models are going to be accurate in any way. Based on the assessment that was conducted by an Indian scientist named Ashutosh, who's a chemist who actually models biochemical systems, he says that the models are becoming increasingly realistic, which is good in and of itself, but they're also becoming less accurate as a result of that, and their predictive capability is also having more uncertainties. Why is that a problem? Why is that a problematic thing? Because the more level of processes that we include within these models, the more uncertainty is also introduced at the same time. Now that more real factors are being included, the uncertainties that are endemic in these factors reveal themselves and get tacked on to these models. As a result, what you face is a rather ironic trade-off, because as your models try to mirror the real world better, they also become uncertain just given the level of assumptions and at the same time the processes that we are trying to implement. So what is the final impact of all of this? We say that because saying something is something that is really accurate is harmful because it can lead to a rather inaccurate policy outcomes. And one of the best example of this is when there were policy responses to predictions about earthquakes are a particularly notable example, because given the fact that certain earthquakes were being predicted but they did not take place, those policy outcomes actually affected the people in a negative way. Additionally, based on NASA that released its research on impacts, it concluded that the development of a transdisciplinary framework to analyze complex interaction among biophysical and socio-economic processes is rather hard because a lot of factors need to be taken into account. So on the comparative, why do we say that you have to vote for opposition? First, we've not only showed you computer models are inaccurate because scientists do not have the adequate knowledge, but also at the same time, models are largely based on assumptions that do not necessarily uphold what the realistic view of the climate will be. At the same time, models do not work on geographic scale. But even then, even if you don't buy the first three contentions, we don't think that the technological progress is fast enough to really say that these models will be accurate within the future, because they will never have the sufficient computing power. But at the same time, the modeling and predicting of the level of uncertainty that the scientists have to deal with will not necessarily lead to accurate results. I'm proud to oppose, and I stand open for questions and cross-examination.
Thank you very much. We now hear a cross-examination from the good lady from the East.